Alrighty, hello and welcome to Divine Roots. My name is Tian. If you are unfamiliar with these structures, I'd like to introduce you to Divine Roots. So at Divine Roots podcast, we do everything in one take. There are no edits whatsoever. It is just record, roll with whatever idea that I had or have, and then whatever comes. So, in a way, a metaphor that summarizes these structures, kind of like when the rainfall happens on a mountain, the water will seep down and it will run down the mountain. How it will arrive to its destination, it's open. There's not like a path, a slide, or even a pipe that it goes in and then ends up at a lake. So everything is rather in that regards that there is a destination. So that is the theme or the topic of the podcast, and essentially everything that happens afterward or during that path is all an exploration. So it's a sense of wonder towards that destination. So for instance, on today's episode is going to be about moss, like how mosses grow, and whatever discovery or wonder happens along the way is what will be recorded. And yeah, so welcome. And without further ado, let's get into it. So again, today's episode is going to be about moss. And for those that don't know, I just learned that moss grows on rocks because he wanted to avoid competition. So imagine moss trying to grow among other organic matters like plants and trees. And these organic matters has roots that goes way deep into the ground. So they have access to water sources that is unobtainable to the moss. So what moss figured out doing is that they are like, you know what? We're not going to compete here. We're going to find somewhere that is absent and scarce of any population, and we'll populate it. So they grow on rocks because no other plant or organic matter has figured out a way to grow on rocks. They need soil, and then they need water. But moss were like, you know what? We don't need that. So they played their own game and created their own structure. They created their own environment, and they don't have to compete. And when I thought about that, that was kind of interesting because in a way, it reminds me of how when we embrace who we are as a person, it allows us to tap into that magical or even like that scarcity that exists within us. Because each and one of us are as scarce as it gets. Because there are no other person or entity that is like us. We are one and only one out of all the human population. There's only one version of us. So that is the most scarce that it can get and unique. And just to elaborate on a little bit further on how unique each of us are, follow this. I have two parents, and my parents have two parents, which makes it 4 grandparents that I have. And again, follow that pattern. 4 grandparents had 2 parents, that makes it 8 grandparents. And that is just 2-3 generations down the line. If you go 20 generations down the line, I will have about 1 million ancestors. That is 20 generations. In other words, 500 years back. 500 years back, and I have 1 million ancestors, let alone 2,000-3,000 years. It is absurd how lucky or even the odd of me existing is It is absurd. Because think about, along that 1 million of ancestors that I had, all it took was just one mistake along the way. A snake bite, poisonous food, a fever, something along the line is all it took to wipe the entire generation's worth of people. Or even like ancestors that came after that. So one ancestor after another. And one misstep along the way, and I wouldn't be here. And we're talking 500 years. We're talking about people who survived the wars, hunger, and diseases, and who could imagine what else was along the way. But it's just wild to imagine that that is where we come from. The odd of existing is that odd. It is so odd that it is odd not to think of how unique we are. That we all have a different composition that is only available to us. Because when you think about it, my mother's side comes from her own family tree, and my father comes from another unique family tree. You combine those two together, you get me, and you, and anyone else. You combine two evolutionary historical paths, two of them, and you fuse them together and you create one. And so it is absurd of how much history and evolution that has been carried down and passed down on one side of the family and the other. So combining those two family sides, I inherit some of them along the way from my dad's side and my mother's side. And then you get me. So on top of my shoulder, or in my DNA, you could say, is an immense, unique combination that no one else has. And so tapping into that uniqueness that we all have and embracing it and becoming it is like the moss saying, we're not going to compete with the trees. Because if the moss tried to compete with, let's say, the redwood tree, that would be not a wise thing to do. They wouldn't be able to stand a chance. The redwood tree grows 1,000,000 times higher than the moss. It will get all the sunlight. The roots grow miles down the ground. It will get all the water, and let alone competing with other plants and organic matter that's around the redwood tree. So the moss has no chance of surviving by playing that game. So in the same way, if I were to compete with, let's say, athletes, my chance of succeeding in that field is slim to none. If my family has, let's say, no history whatsoever in athleticism, or even in a sense that, let's say my family tree has a common, let's say disease, but a common error within their biology that we have, let's say high blood pressure or something like that, which is true. But so, and then you have another family tree who has high muscle density, high bone density in the get-go, right? They come out and they're just born to be athletes. And then here I am trying to compete with that. And the saying is not that I couldn't compete. Of course I could, but the chance of succeeding is like slim to none. Of course, there are outliers that exist in the world and people who beat all odds, of course. And that's not to say that, let's say, the moss couldn't grow or compete with the redwood. Maybe they found a way to compete. But in a general sense, the essence of the moss is that it managed to find its own ground. It managed to utilize what it is to be what it is. And by doing so, it's able to thrive in places where other couldn't. And therefore, there are no competition. No other plants or organic matter is going to grow on rocks and shady places. Only moss can do that because they evolved to do so. And that is the aspect of embracing what you are and being who you are, and allows it to be like that. Because if the moss would deny its own abilities and deny its own inheritance and its unique ability to grow on rocks, and it said instead, you know what? I like the masses. I want to be accepted into society and be with them. And I'm going to try to compete where other people compete, because that's where all the resources is at. So the mosses goes on and try to compete with other organic matter, and it quickly finds out that it's not able to sustain itself because it doesn't have the necessary tools to do so. It doesn't have a root system that can reach deep down and get water. Right? So it is not a game that it should compete in. It could try, maybe it could somehow, but in a sense that its essence, it managed to grow on rocks, and that's where it thrives, and that's how it evolved. And let alone what makes me think that, or anyone that exists on this planet who doesn't have that unique ability, because each person came from such a unique parents and grandparents and great-great-grandparents, and they survived through by any means that gave them the tools to do so, and they successfully evolved and survived by their tools. So their tools are passed down to the next and the next and the next and the next, and then we have me and you. So within us all, there are certain tools and abilities that is hidden. Some use it very early on because they know themselves, because their parents knew themselves, and some are just they are exposed to an environment where they could practice such things to embrace who they are and not be, let's say, lost in translation. Let's say a moss never realized that it was a moss, so it tries to grow with other organic matter just to fail to grow because it's just in the wrong field. But then along the way, somebody comes and say, hey, you know, moss can grow on rocks, right? Nobody grows there. And if you want, you could grow on rocks because you have the abilities you need to grow there, and no one else can. And sometimes in life, there are people who can see those light within us, and other times there aren't. And so by whatever means that comes your way is what we have to our disposal. Not every time there's someone's going to carry us and put us on a rock for us to grow on. Other times we would just have to fight our way to the rock, and that becomes the journey of our life. And other times some people are inherited and born onto a very beautiful rock that has no competition, and they live fruitfully all their lives. And that's just nature. There are some trees that grows and there's some trees that don't. There are some trees that get chopped down, there are some trees that don't. There are some things that decays and some that don't. That is just the nature of life. And so the premise is that deep in within us all lies a unique ability that is crafted and molded and tailored and gifted that is only available to us. And when we tap into that, what's available, it's only available to us and no one else. And if that is not magical to you, like imagine having something that nobody else has in this world. That's you. No one has access to what you have but you. So it's almost like an instrument that we have that if we play our instrument, it creates such a unique vibration or resonance that nobody else can duplicate or create. It is only available to us because the components that made me came from my mother and my father. And let's say my mother is a coconut tree, my father is a pine tree. You have that combination, which creates me. And let's say I'm a guitar. Now I'm made out of a coconut tree and a pine tree guitar. And everyone else is the same way, but a different combination. So learning how to play our own instrument allows us to play the resonance that reside within us. And it creates such a unique sound that no one else in the world can produce. And it becomes valuable only if it can be played. So if I'm a guitar and I play myself like a ukulele or a piano, for instance, instead of strumming the strings, I start to tap on it like a piano. I'm not going to produce the sound it was designed to do. So only when I tap into my own instrument and play it how it was designed to do and do the things that it was designed to do, only then will it produce its vibration, its resonance that reside within us. And all of us has that. So understanding it, learning how to play it, and utilizing it allow us to become like the moss. Finding our own ground, being in our own place and thriving because we have such a unique ability and composition in this world. And that's going to be it for today's episode. And I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.